Before we begin, I have just one request. Put on your headphones, turn off the lights, and let the world outside fade away. Because some stories aren't just meant to be heard, they're meant to be felt. Every whisper, every breath, every sound behind you might not be just in the story. So, are you ready? Let's begin. White with red. The cold wind of autumn whispered through the tall, wrought iron gates as Victor Grimsby stepped across the moss covered threshold of his new residence, the Belgrave Estate Apartments, an aged Victorian building nestled at the edge of the sleepy English village of Duskbrook. The air hung heavy with centuries of memory, and ivy clung to the crumbling stone like long forgotten hands grasping for remembrance. Victor had come to Duskbrook for peace. The city had devoured his soul, one rent payment and one sleepless night at a time. After a bitter divorce and the sudden loss of his mother, he sought refuge in the solitude of the countryside. Inside the dimly lit foyer, the scent of old wood and lavender oil mingled. An elderly woman sat at the reception desk. Her back was straight and her hands were clasped together, skin pale like milk left too long in porcelain. A brass placard on her desk read, Madame Alira Hawthorne, resident keeper. Mr. Grimsby, she said with a nod, as though she had been expecting him far longer than he'd been alive. She slid the ornate key across the counter. Its handle was shaped like a serpent biting its tail. Third floor, apartment 313, she murmured, her voice dry and soft like the rustle of old curtains. But a word of caution. Victor paused. Do not disturb the door with no number. It is also on your floor. His brows furrowed. Why? Madame Hawthorne's lips trembled into a thin smile, one not born of kindness but of old pain. Because curiosity is a mirror, and mirrors show more than reflections. Before he could ask further, she lowered her gaze, dismissing the conversation like one would shoo a ghost from memory. Victor's apartment was quaint, touched with echoes of a time when wallpaper had stories and fireplaces spoke in crackling tongues. After hours of unpacking and organizing his belongings, the sun dipped beneath the horizon, casting long, wine-colored shadows through the windows. But something gnawed at him, the image of a door with no number. Midnight chimed with a slow iron bell. Victor opened the door of his apartment and stepped into the hallway. The gas lamps along the corridor flickered, casting a sickly yellow glow that barely pushed back the darkness. And there it was, a door, a simple wooden door. No number, no knocker, just old wood, scratched, time-worn, and silent. Drawn by a pull he could not name, Victor approached. He pressed his ear to the wood. Nothing. Then, as though possessed by something beyond reason, he knelt and peered through the keyhole. The room beyond was empty. Dust floated like snowflakes in amber light. The faded walls bore the markings of a once elegant apartment, though now abandoned and worn by time. But then his breath caught. In the far corner stood a woman, her back to him. She faced the wall, motionless like a shadow frozen in time. Her skin was unnaturally pale, hair long, black, and wet-looking, cascading over a simple white dress. Victor staggered back, heart pounding. He felt ashamed, as if he had stolen something sacred, something private. A living person, perhaps? But no, the aura was wrong. Too still, too cold. He told himself it was nothing. A squatter, maybe? Or someone in mourning. He slept little that night. The image of the unmoving woman haunted his dreams, her presence more felt than seen. The next morning was gray, the sky a smudged charcoal canvas. The wind outside howled with a voice, or the memory of one. Victor's thoughts turned to the door again. He tried to read, to write, to distract himself with anything, but by dusk he found himself once again before the door. This time, he didn't hesitate. He knelt, heart tight in his chest, and pressed his eye to the keyhole. Red. Everything was red. No shadows, no room, no woman. Just a wash of crimson, as if someone had smeared blood across the keyhole or was staring back at him. He recoiled, goosebumps rising like the dead from a forgotten grave. He rushed downstairs, heart racing, the shadows seeming to follow him, as if the building itself had turned its attention toward him. Madame Hawthorne was still at her post, unmoved by time or tide. I looked through the keyhole, Victor confessed, his voice thin and broken. She did not look surprised, only sad. So deeply, anciently sad. I feared you might, she whispered. Then, with a sigh that seemed to come from the bones of the earth itself, she gestured to the armchair by the fireplace. Victor sat. The hearth was unlit. Still, he felt warmth, or perhaps heat from some unseen place. She began. A long time ago, long before you were born, that apartment belonged to the Morwen family, a couple from the north. Beautiful, reclusive, and strange. He was a painter, she a violinist. Their love was the sort that burned, not in passion, but in obsession. Victor listened, transfixed. They never came out. Groceries were delivered, music played at odd hours, but one day, the music stopped. The painter began screaming instead. People said he had gone mad, that he believed his wife's reflection was watching him. Not her, but something wearing her face. Madame Hawthorne's eyes gleamed with something unspeakable. One night, the building shook with a sound, like glass and thunder, and then silence when the authorities broke in. She paused, her voice dropped to a whisper. They found the wife, face pressed against the corner wall, her eyes wide open, her body untouched, but her soul gone. And the painter? Victor swallowed. He had gouged his own eyes out with the tip of a paintbrush, said her eyes turned red, that they were looking through the walls, that she saw through the keyhole. The room felt colder now, as if something ancient had heard its name spoken aloud. They were not normal people, Mr. Rush. Grimsby, she continued, both had skin like porcelain, hair like ravens, and eyes like blood. Victor said nothing. He left without another word. That night he locked every door, every window. He stared at his reflection until sleep took him. But dreams came like fire. He dreamt of the hallway, of the keyhole, of looking inside and seeing himself staring back, pale with red eyes and a painted smile. He awoke drenched in sweat, and from the hallway a violin played. Faint, hollow, twisted. By the following evening, the apartment above him had grown colder. He could feel it leaking through the floorboards like ice water. Driven by dread or curiosity, perhaps both, he approached the door once again. This time he did not kneel. Instead, he placed a trembling hand on the handle. Unlocked. It creaked open slowly as though expecting him. The room was bathed in candlelight. Dusty, forgotten candles and antique holders flickered despite no flame. The walls were covered in canvas paintings, all blank save for one in the center, a woman, pale, black hair, facing the wall. Victor stepped inside. His footfalls were silent as though the room swallowed sound itself. He moved toward the painting, hand outstretched, and then she turned, slowly, unnaturally, her head twisted first, then her shoulders as if resisting the laws of nature. Her face was bone pale, stretched tight, with hollow eyes glowing red. Victor couldn't scream. He couldn't breathe. The last thing he saw was her smile. Days later, when a new tenant arrived, he was handed a key by Madame Hawthorne, older now and even more tired. "Third floor," she murmured. "Apartment 313. The young man nodded, then asked, curious, "What about the door with no number?" She paused. Her eyes grew distant. Then, with a breath barely there, she said, "There's no such door," and smiled as if to seal the truth beneath centuries of silence. YouTube narration style notes for voiceover. Narration tone: calm, deep male voice, slowly paced, with a European, British, or Irish accent. Music: low, haunting string background, like a single violin playing discordant notes, ambient reverb effects. Sound effects: floor creaking, distant violin music, wind howling, candle flickers, heartbeat during tense keyhole scenes. Pauses: use deliberate silences after key lines for dramatic tension, especially red, she turned, and there's no such door.